Hello all, this is the Owl, and hell yeah, it's been too long. At last, today, as promised, we're going to be going back to Gantz and tackling the entire second hunt, its intermission segment, and its aftermath. And yeah, I've had a few folks, I suppose, start reading Gantz after my last video, or say that they tried to get into it before they gave up fast, asking me when exactly this manga gets good. And that's an interesting question. If you mean when does this thing become so good that it justifies me saying it's among my favorite manga of all time, Hunt 3 would be a pretty safe answer. Maybe the segment between Hunts 4 and 5 if you want to play it safe. But if you mean when does this manga start seriously kicking ass, I would say Hunt 2. Now, I would hesitate to call it mind-blowing. There are some very odd moments in the second intermission, we'll get there. But if Hunt 3 is where Gantz puts all of its cards on the table, Hunt 2 is where it starts to tip its hand. Oh, and of course, there are some completely and utterly bonkers cultural stuff too. So, without any further ado, let's dive right back on in. We start where we left off last time, the three Bozoku. Yes, I know they have names, but they're such nothing characters, I'm not even gonna bother. The model-looking guy Hojo, the grandmother and her grandkid, and Hojo's stalker Satoko. They've all joined the main cast in the orb room. Tensions flare as the Bozoku demand answers and act like hooligans, while also aggressively hitting on Kishimoto, who in turn appears practically glued to Kato's side, much to Kei's frustration. Yeah, I want you to keep an eye on Kei, as he really does evolve as a character, and it's one of the most interesting things about the story in that this development is not linear. As a minor spoiler, he will remain a frustrating character for a bit, with the odd pretty cool or even watershed moment here and there. And then, at some point in the story, he gradually begins to grow up, and you'll see why he's one of my favorite characters in any manga of all time. Not because he's super cool or super heroic, but because I really do understand him. He's a teenage boy with all of the flaws, insecurities, and selfishnesses that implies. Meanwhile, the grandmother and her young grandson are freaking out. It's weird that neither kids nor animals are exempt from being drawn into Gantz on their death, although I guess once we learn what Gantz exactly is, which by the way comes way later in the story, this makes either perfect sense or zero sense, depending on how cynical you feel today. Kato, meanwhile, a natural leader, begins trying to rally the panicking group with limited success, as well as provoking Nishi's anger, as he demands that Kato shut the hell up and essentially just leave the newcomers to their deaths. This does give us an interesting insight into the difference between their personalities. Nishi views Gantz as a competitive game, while Kato is proceeding as if it were cooperative. Honestly, with the way points work, you wouldn't be wrong to agree with Nishi at this point. But let's just say both of them are right, and both of them are wrong. And just like that, things very nearly turn into complete and utter frigging bedlam. However, before things can really get out of control, well, they will, but at least this provides a temporary armistice. A now familiar song plays. Man, I'm annoyed that I can't play the actual song for you. How the hell do you copyright something from the frigging 1920s in HK, especially a free radio broadcast? Regardless, the orb gives us our briefing for Hunt 2 and yes, okay. This is going to need its own section because it's too much fun. As always, if the cultural stuff doesn't hold much interest for you, feel free to skip ahead to the next numbered chapter. Enjoy! Okay, so where to start here? Well, the design of their target is based on a musician by the name of Seiji Tanaka. How on earth would I describe Seiji Tanaka? He's an eccentric musician that obtained moderate fame in the 1970s for his vaguely country, vaguely enka, vaguely folk, and sometimes vaguely comedic music. That reminds me of the terrible Afrikaans country or folk songs that my father adored, and sadly experiments at uploading even a tiny portion of one of his songs. Got immediately claimed, so just look for him on YouTube, especially his song Beautiful Sunday. His personality is likely what got him most of his fans, particularly amongst kids, as imagine if Mr. Rogers was younger, Japanese, and also just a little off. Regardless, he's fairly obscure today, but clearly he made an impression on Hiroya Oku, who based our Hantu alien on him, and also, Japanese humor, as anyone who has spent much time there will be able to tell you, is maybe 10% mean-spirited physical humor and pranks, 20% sex jokes, and 70% awful dad joke level puns. And of course, in the Japanese style, Seiji Tanaka becomes Tanaka Seiji, after which you add one letter to get Tanaka Seijin. Seijin being one way to say space alien in Japanese. So, right now, we get Tanaka Alien. Now the rest of this seems to be mostly a rumor, but apparently Tanaka was not a fan of having a killer alien in a very gory, very booby, and very controversial manga based on his likeness, and he allegedly threatened to sue. Remember, Japan has no fair use or parody exception, and the courts almost always side with the plaintiff in cases like this, so they changed it to Suzuki Alien in the anime and later reprints, although I've never seen the latter in the wild. And the English versions all use Tanaka, so who the hell knows? Maybe it's just a case of internet telephone. What is really funny about all of this is, if you go and look at any of Tanaka's videos on YouTube, you'll probably find the majority of the comments mentioning Gantz. So Tanaka, mate, on the minuscule but non-zero chance you end up watching this, be a bit more grateful anyway. At Kato's urging, the Gantz participants begin arming themselves, although persuading them to put suits on is proving quite difficult. Regardless, as he prepares to don his own suit, Kei makes a horrible discovery. It's gone. Oh crap. Remember? He left it at home. And this gives us a new rule, or at least a modifier to one of the rules from part 1. You can take your gear out of Gantz and use it in the real world however you see fit. I guess so long as you don't give the game away. But if it's not on you at the time of you being beamed in, you will have to do without it, as Kato is able to persuade everyone besides the Bozoku to get into their suits. Kei freaks out. Nishi taunts him, calling him a dead man walking, and Kato is genuinely astonished at the carelessness of his friend. Nishi intimates that there's something they can do, but refuses to tell them. Spoiler, he's talking out of his ass. But before things get uglier, the Bozoku leader has finally put his suit on, much to the amusement of his friends, and they're messing with the various Gantz guns, when one accidentally, shoots Nishi in the face. The The suit seems to absorb the blast, which raises questions as we'll see in the next bit. But Nishi responds by straight up shooting him in the head. A guy without a suit. Yeah, this is gonna have to be censored. It's an extremely long and extremely gory sequence in which the Bozoku's head blows up everywhere. Kishimoto begins to freak out. Remember, she was not privy to the massacre in Hunt 1. And yeah, Nishi is a straight up psychopath. We will learn more about his character much later on, but for now, that's basically it. Shortly after this, we see a brief confrontation between Nishi and Kato. And yes, if my audio sounds a little bit different, I had to take a break halfway through this segment. Babies, man. Nishi seems to sense something about him, aside from his strength, his natural charisma, and his leadership skills. And while he does make threats, as always, he fades out pretty fast. However, Kato is starting to realize that the suits give the Gantz hunters absolutely staggering physical power and resilience. How much, do you ask? Well, Oku has in fact gone into detail about the suits in his Gantz manuals, but it's all pretty wibbly-woo and incredibly inconsistent. I personally like my headcanon as per the previous video a lot more, as it's both metal AF and makes a bit more sense than his hand-wavium. However, the thing that constantly frustrates me is the quantification of the specific benefits given. We'll be exploring these a lot more in both this and the next hunt. But yeah, let's just say inconsistent. They allegedly allow the wearer to easily lift 15 tons, which, no, aside from one or two banana nut muffin insane moments, and are also virtually indestructible within certain constraints. They do at least seem to be able to take an impact from the X-gun, and considering how powerful those things are, they are at the very least pretty tough. And again, we will go into more details as the story progresses, and we can see the limitations of the suits explored. Regardless, Nishi asks to be sent into the hunt zone first, and Gantz obliges. As they depart, Nishi reiterates a core principle of Gantz. While they are a team, they are also competing for points in order to escape. It's all well and good to try and keep everyone alive, but at the end of the day, this mindset might well get them all killed. K, on the other hand, continues to freak out. He is about to be sent on a hunt without a suit, which is not good. Kato, however, tells him not to worry. He will protect him. This is pretty shameful, considering Kishimoto is right there, and this causes her to fall for Kato even harder. Poor Kei, but Kato, you're such a good dude. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, we see a television set playing a Tanaka Seiji concert as a huge quantity of eggs begin to hatch. Kei is teleported in, on the middle of a busy road in the path of a truck bearing down on him. Yeah, you really can see Oku getting to grips with his digital art style now, and it's bloody effective. Actually, a bit later in Hunt 2, there's this whole sequence which contains one of my favorite panels from the early manga. We'll get there. While he does narrowly avoid getting his head bashed, oh dear. He's been dropped in right near their target, who is rapidly approaching. This time though, there's something a bit different. The alien is accompanied by a good few small, ugly-looking bird creatures. Kei, exercising a bit of genuine ingenuity, feels around for the headless biker's corpse with his yet-to-be teleported torso, and takes the X-pistol the man fired at Nishi in order to at least bring a weapon with him. Quick thinking, mate. And yes, you might as well call this Chekhov's X-pistol ner. And that sees out Volume 3, although I will say, Hiroya Oku's volume extras are quite something, ranging from a very cute and endearing idea, such as cat-shaped rice cakes, to discussions of the various Western media that inspired specific elements of Gantz, to pretty much porn, to, I think it's an extract from his even more controversial manga Hen, which is actual porn, and we will get there when we get there. No, there's no way I can show you much of that. Volume 4 starts off with a terrified Kei facing off against the Tanaka alien, not quite sure what sort of move to make without his suit. However, the alien seems to have zero interest in him and walks past. This is one aspect of the manga that isn't often explored or even really discussed, but this is likely what Nishi was alluding to. Sometimes, but not always, monsters will ignore unsuited Gantz members so long as they make no offensive moves. However, this comes up maybe twice in the entire manga, and never again to my memory, for reasons that will become obvious later, so I would not worry about it. Kei aims at the back of its head, but, yet again, finds that he cannot pull the trigger, especially when he thinks of Nishi, who, remember, said that Kei was, somewhere deep down, just like him. And that's frightening, because Nishi is crazier than a fridge full of weasels. However, as he worries, one of the weird birds climbs up and starts biting him pretty hard. As he starts trying to shake it off, he realizes that, the two creatures are connected. And sure enough, the Tanaka alien rounds on him and starts... Okay, the Tanaka alien says a lot of weird crap. I'm not going into it too much. It's stuff the real Tanaka Seiji would say. Catchphrases, song lyrics, and his weird one-liners. And I guess that's how they attempt to communicate with humans. I swear. I should do an art contest as to what the aliens would look like if they watched a modern singers concert instead. Meanwhile, the other Gantz hunters are gradually being teleported in, and they start to realize that, yeah, Kato was telling the truth, and thus was likely correct about the suits. Well, most of them. The fodder, I mean the Bozoku guys, start wandering away, attempting to leave the zone, which means that if they don't stop, it'll be super fun, head explodey times. However, Kato shouting at them does alert Kei to his position at least. In a weirdly comedic and yet genuinely tense sequence, Kei is unsure of how to respond to the weird Tanaka creature, which suddenly turns angry and starts following him. This causes him to walk away at speed, with the Tanaka chasing him also at a kind of speed walk. I have no idea why, but this bit really tickles me. Regardless, Kei leads the creature into the waiting group of hunters, and things are about to pop off in a big way and get pretty messed up. Because Gantz. Let's take a look. As the hunters cluster around the Tanaka creature, unsure of exactly what to do, an attacking enemy would be simple, but this thing is just, well, standing there menacingly. One of the Bozoku remark that it looks like one of the robots made by Honda or Suzuki, almost certainly a nod to the world-famous Ashimo units that had debuted at the time and honestly even now are pretty damn impressive, leading to the development of several technologies we use today, including those self-balancing walking assist devices. Anyway, they argue about what to do next. Kato says that the creature doesn't seem dangerous, but Kei reminds him about what happened on the last hunt. However, a shimmer appears as Nishi, cloaked, steps on and squashes one of these small birds, almost certainly trying to agitate the creature so that it goes on the offensive and wipes out the party. leaving him to collect the points, yeah, you dick. And this is very solo leveling. Only this immediately backfires. In a schadenfreude-tastic moment, the creature's mouth opens and emits a powerful sonic blast, forcing everyone behind to cover their ears and knocking Nishi out of his cloak. Oh bugger. Nishi retreats down into the canal below them, but the creature leaps after him, still firing off sonic blasts. Nishi returns fire with the X-gun, but it darts out of the way before he can hit it. This thing is substantially more formidable than even the Onion Tyrant. However, the Tanaka seems to be coming out ahead, landing another hit with its sonic cannon, this time fully destroying Nishi's cloaking device. Yeah, that thing also actually doubles as a Gantz radar, and this heralds Nishi getting pretty handily thrashed and eventually cornered in a very creepy pair of panels, with Tanaka approaching and trying to hit him point blank. But Nishi catches it by surprise and punches it directly into a nearby stairwell, bouncing it off the steel railing. One thing that I must give Oku props for are his fights, which feel visceral, desperate, and crystal clear as to what's happening to who and where. This is harder than you'd think to do in a drawn medium. However, we then see that something is leaking out of Nishi's suit, specifically out of these so-called caps. Is it blood? Is it essential fluid? Does it really matter? Not really. Whatever the case is, this is another Gantz rule. The suits are indeed powerful and tough, but they do have an upper limit. And I will throw in a mild spoiler here. They're really good when it comes to absorbing directly applied force, such as from bullets or bludgeoning attacks, but much less so when it comes to energy-based weapons and acids, and they're also quite vulnerable to cutting and piercing weapons of a certain power. When the suit breaks, it no longer offers any protection and will bleed from the caps. Nishi begins calling for help. Yeah, ironic, considering he was the one playing silly buggers for most of the story thus far, but this is where everyone rallies, comes together, and fights as one. Nope. Most of the others, including Kei, tell Nishi to basically go roll it up and stuff it up his butt, but Kato tells Kei to help everyone figure out their suits and prepares to leap down to save Nishi, except he's too late. The Tanaka creature closes the distance and hits him point blank, and yeah, in another sequence that I can't show you much of, holy crap is this bit graphic. Nishi's eyes and eardrums explode, as do several of his teeth, spraying blood everywhere as he screams. Kato is able to grab the terribly injured kid and drags him to the concrete paving at the edge of the canal, but the Tanaka creature pursues, and after a brief struggle, Kato grabs it in a bear hug, and as he squeezes, oh what the hell is that? Something like a horrible, stinking, slime-covered bird thing bursts out, and Kei is able to hit it with the sending gun. We see that the Tanaka is basically just a robotic suit that allowed the bird thing to move and breathe in our atmosphere. Regardless, just like that, it seems the hunt is over, and Kei was basically able to, well, steal the points from Nishi. Get bent, you psychopath. Only, well, you'll see. As Kato tends to a badly stricken Nishi, Kei remarks that they should have been sent back already, right? They notice that more of the little birds are still running around, and the Bozoku attempt to stop them, because of course they do. Hojo, as it so happens, has a spare radar unit, and it appears there is something else they need to kill before Gantz will send them back. The little birds don't count at all. However, Nishi is not doing well, begging Gantz to take him back immediately, saying that he doesn't want to die, and, well, he does exactly that. And this bit is genuinely harrowing. Before he croaks, he tells Kato that if someone reaches 100 points, they will be freed. Then, the toughest guy in Gantz dies in front of them, choking on his own blood, teeth, and ruptured organs, and crying for his mother. Bloody hell, Oku, that was rough. Kei, watching this, realizes that, yeah, he's affected, but not anywhere near as badly as last time. He is starting to get used to death. Of course, the party immediately starts freaking out. The young grandson in hysterics, the Bozoku threatening him, trying to make him shut up. We get some information recapped. They can't leave the zone until they finish the hunt, and they must finish the hunt before the timer reaches 0. So most of the hunters head off in search of the last target. However, realizing that he's actually in the major poo, Kei is cornered by the 2 surviving Bozoku, and they tell him to start walking. One of them has a suit, so there's no real way for him to fight back. And yeah, on a whim, they beat 7 shades of crap out of Kei and take his Y-gun, but he's able to quietly conceal the X-pistol as they force him up out of the canal area and onto the streets at gunpoint. Meanwhile, the hunters head to the radar-indicated location, and sure enough, they find a second Tanaka, and a third, and a fourth coming from behind, and finally, a 5th one from above. Oh dear. Yeah, there are 5 of these bastard things in all now. Kato tackles one and tells the others to do as he does. Squeeze them out of the suits, let them die in our atmosphere. But it all starts going badly wrong. Kato gets hit by 4 blasts at the same time, breaking his suit much like Nishi's, and Kishimoto gets knocked back when she tries to help. Kato is, at least, able to take one of them out, and Kishimoto bags another one herself by shooting it from behind, blowing it and its own suit to bits in a shower of guts, metal, and feathers. Hojo kills a third, and the remaining 2 leave in pursuit of the grandmother and her kid. Yeah, this is another sequence that YouTube would probably not be okay with. It's also pretty damn warped, even though we don't see all that much of it, but suffice to say, despite her trying to shield him with her body, both the grandmother and her grandson die horribly. Yeah, Gantz is not playing around. We never see the kill shot on him, but we do see the aftermath later, and that's 1 dead kid and 1 dead old lady. Back with the main group, the last of the birds suffocates, reaffirming that they cannot survive in our air and need those suits to breathe. Well, 2 left, I guess, and they head off, sadly too late to help the 2 hunters who fled. Meanwhile, Kei is being forced to scout for the 2 Bozoku, as their radar says there's an alien nearby in a set of dingy apartments. After a mild argument, Kei realizes that he has no choice and heads inside, saying, "This is pretty funny. These must be apartments for foreigners." Okay, so renting a house or a flat in Japan isn't as simple as it is in the West. And as a foreigner, it can be nearly bloody impossible now, let alone 20 plus years ago. See, almost nobody will rent property to ye old gaijin for, I've never understood the reason. And those that will are either massive scammers, overpriced, short-term hostel or house-sharing type affairs, or something a bit worse than tenements. To rent a regular apartment or a house, even if you can find a landlord willing to take on a foreigner, not all that common. You will be expected to find a Japanese guarantor, someone to sign your contract with you, and who will be responsible if you turn out to be Jack the Ripper and flee the country, I guess. And this can't just be any old person. They must be professional, in good repute, with a paying job, and not your family member. which is naturally really frigging difficult. It's like finding someone to co-sign a loan. And even if you can find this, expect to be raked over the coals when it comes to rent and deposits, including a hefty key money or rake-in, cash you pay at the start of your stay at an apartment, generally framed as damage insurance, but in actuality is closer to one of Japan's many semi-formalized and legitimized bribes. Now, I will say that this situation is better out in the country, generally because you can find a landlord or two who are desperate to rent to basically anyone with a pulse, as many, if not most, apartment complexes or groups of rental houses are half empty due to the mass exodus towards the cities. Even then though, you'll need that guarantor, but it might be worth it because some of these houses are pretty damn amazing. I mean, I lucked out and was able to rent a full house practically on the beach for about $300 a month. Granted, this was a decade ago and my workplace had to sign on as well. In big cities, at least at the turn of the century, it was pretty wretched. So what specifically is Kay talking about here? Well, back then, foreign workers mostly stayed in unofficially designated foreigner apartment blocks. These were essentially their only option, and were horrible. For one, they were expensive, and beyond that, they were incredibly poorly maintained to the point of being almost slum-like, and at times, well, actually incredibly dangerous. They had very few amenities and were pretty miserable all told. And on top of this, your landlord would constantly be trying to gouge extra money out of you via threats of eviction or cutting your utilities. Not nice. I'm actually still racking my brains for the name of the big company that owned most of the big foreign worker flat blocks, but I remember hearing endless stories about how crap they were from my friends working in the cities. However, I will say that in the last decade or so, things have improved somewhat by means of simple competition over the rapidly growing expat and foreign worker populations in the larger metropolitan cities, as well as government mandates to improve internationalization, with accommodation for foreigners slowly becoming a cottage industry of its own, albeit not the best quality or value-wise even now, and if anything, even more infested with scammers. Yeah, it still sucks, and you'll still need a guarantor, but at least employers have become a bit more savvy on this, and generally understand that they will need to help their foreign workers to find a place to rent. And outside of said scams, very few of these are the slums that were once your only option. Anyways, as Kay walks through the building, he begins seeing the tiny, horrible birds wandering around, before doors begin to open and he's absolutely surrounded by Tanakas. Only these make no move to attack and instead simply surround him as the door at the end of the hall opens and reveals something huge, barely visible in the gloom. More Tanakas arrive and begin saying all kinds of weird Tanaka Seiji lines, lyrics and catchphrases, and Kei tries to remain still and unobtrusive, but these smaller birds begin chewing on his neck in a genuinely agonizing way, drawing blood and leading him to drag one off, angering the Tanakas and causing, oh yeah, that's the boss bird, to look around. Again, this is why I say that solo leveling and quite a few other isekais, or I guess reverse ikais of that nature, are heavily inspired by Gantz, as this will be our structure for the next while, at least during hunts. We'll have smaller but still dangerous enemies, sometimes a mini-boss or two, and finally a boss alien that tends to be completely overpowered. Now, Surrounded by a wall of death, Kei thinks of a plan, and it's kind of a humdinger. Meanwhile, the other Gantz hunters close in on another signal. If this area doesn't look familiar to you, it's where the grandmother and the grandkid died. In a surprising bit of restraint from Oku, we don't actually see the kid's corpse close up, but I can confirm both of these are 100% dead here. Horrified, Hojo, Kato, and Kishimoto do manage to fight and take out the two Tanakas. We switch back to Kei's perspective, who is about to either get blasted or eaten by the Tanakas and the boss respectively, but we finally get to see his desperate plan. He fires repeatedly at the floor of the rundown apartment block, then several times at the walls. These collapse as the X-pistol shot detonate and he falls through, and then, as the rest go off, the entire building begins to fall down around him. Yeah, remember when I said that the art gets better and that Oku's sense of scale and location is just great? This sequence is probably my first clear example of it. I mean, just look at his use of angled paneling and how it contributes to desperation and the sense of a rapidly collapsing building, culminating in this, one of my favorite double spreads early on in the manga, as the entire building essentially implodes, crushing down on the aliens, killing all the Tanakas as Kei dashes out in the nick of time, straight past two astonished Bozoku. They prepare to attack Kei. However, before they can do anything, the fat Bozoku is grabbed by huge talons and lifted into the air as the bird boss arrives and is then decapitated off panel as it bites off his head. Jeez. It lands again, this time menacing Hojo before sending him sprawling with a headbutt, and then it sets its sights on Kei. Before he can respond, it grabs him and flies him up into the sky in some more genuinely stunning panels. Believe it or not, as good as this is, the art actually gets exponentially better from here, by the way. Starting to see why I love this manga. As they fly, it repeatedly tries to bite him and tear off his head, and while he narrowly avoids it time and time again, you know, I have to wonder if this entire sequence is a nod to the absolutely brilliant battle at the end of the Lost Children arc from Berserk. You know, its most unadaptable story. Regardless, it finally grabs Kei's arm and leg and prepares to just bite him in half. Now, on the very edge of death, Kei remembers what they've learned about these creatures. He reaches up and just manages to yank out the device embedded in its mouth, and it immediately begins to freak out, suffocate, and plummet towards the ground. It flings him down, and as he falls, Kei aims up and blows it apart with the X-pistol. Holy crap, that was amazing! And yes, almost all the fights moving forward are at least this good, and most are way better. Just wait until Hunt 3, that's all I'm saying. And yeah, Kei is victorious. But what will happen next? Well, let's take a look. Kei lands hard on his back on a roof which, yeah, no, dead, but whatever. And while he does look a bit worse for the wear, and not especially happy to see Kishimoto glomped onto Kato again, he's relieved to see them beginning to be transported back. While they did lose several members, more survived this time. The Bozoku leader, Hojo, assumedly Sadako, and our three main characters. The scoring is also fairly impressive, as Kishimoto, Kato, and Hojo, who the orb sarcastically calls Homo, yeah, thank you early 2000s, get a handsome reward of 5 to 10 points apiece. They are all utterly stunned, however, when they see that Kei got a ridiculously high score of 38 points, a reward for him killing several Tanakas. the boss and escaping with only superficial injuries by pure luck and a desire to survive. That's awesome. However, as Kishimoto begins hinting to Kato that she would actually like to come and live with him, Kei realizes that he's actually still really unhappy as jealousy begins to grow in him. And that ends the second hunt, and we start out on the intermission before the absolute doomsday that is Hunt 3. After this, yeah, I'm going to be honest here, this intermission is one of the weakest parts of the manga, although there are still one or two interesting things that arise. First up, we see a somewhat friend-zoned and lonely Kei, lying in bed with Kishimoto sleeping on the floor now. By the way, this is not an uncommon arrangement in Japan, even between married couples. He's frankly deservedly proud of himself for surviving the battle with the bird boss without a suit, but he's desperately trying to impress Kishimoto by bragging, and all she can do, however, is extol Kato's virtues, and this causes Kei to get more and more irritated, especially when she says that there's nobody like Kato, and this causes him to completely erupt at her, accusing her of just using him and telling her that if she loves Kato so much, why the hell doesn't she go and stay with him instead? To his horror, she calls his bluff, apologizes, genuinely thanks him for everything he's done for her, and leaves immediately. Kei freezes, then dashes outside to apologize, but nope, too late, she's gone. Ugh, damn man. This is, I will admit, another bit that people don't like, but you know, it's grown on me. Think of it this way, even though he is starting to show signs of the man that he will one day become, Kei is, when you get down to the brass tacks, still a middle teenager, and those of us who recall being that age, well, I know that I had at least one incident where I really fancied a girl. I might well have had a shot, but the second she started talking about another guy, I turned into a salty, jealous little doucher and drove her away. This is what I mean. Kei is not always a likable character, and he can be a very frustrating one, but he is extremely well written if you can get into the teenage boy headspace. Teenagers can be dumb, mean, petty, and sometimes lash out without good reason, and while they do feel guilty later, it's sometimes too late. This is, yet again, a learning experience for Kei. Anyway, later, we see Kei at school, and we actually start getting some more insights into his, well, everything. Outside of something bad that happened with his family, a big part of his deeply rooted insecurities is that he's just not very good at anything. He's not a terrible athlete, but there are many kids better than him. He's not a terrible student, but not amazingly bright either. He's just a dude, a basic dude, an unremarkable dude, and he feels invisible and alone. Yeah, teenager. Later, we see him ruminating on the hunts and the crazy stuff he's achieved. Beating the onion alien hand to hand, beating the bird boss without his suit, and he realizes that now he really wants to go back into Gantz. Maybe Nishi wasn't too far from the mark after all. One thing that's interesting here is that while he was hesitant to kill anything, when put on the ropes by the bird boss, he actually killed it without any hesitation. Yeah, Kei's developing, and perhaps not into the nicest character either. And that's something else to keep in mind. Not all progress is positive, and not all growth is linear or in a good direction. Again, it's subtle, but sort of awesome. A few days later, the surviving Bozoku member, who had taken his X-pistol out of the game, uses it to murder his loan shark, giving us, yeah, if this looks familiar, this panel would later turn into a pretty popular meme. Yeah, That one. Although later, the Bozoku leader tries to use it on the gang that killed him and his friends, but this is too public a use of Gantz gear, causing his brain bomb to go off, and he dies from a massive internal rupture, to the complete astonishment of those around him. And yes, you might be able to hear Baby Owl in the background. Mrs. Owl is doing her best. Also, wouldn't just detonating the bomb cause more questions? Especially if there's some sort of autopsy? Kato, meanwhile, has found a new place for him and his little brother. If you recall, they are orphans and were taken in by their relatives. This is normal in Japan, in that relatives will be essentially forced by the government to take in children or even adults who are unable to care for themselves if the caregiver passes away. And yeah, this often results in a massive imposition, bad blood, and abuse. It's a very complicated scenario. Regardless, we learn that Kato has been squirreling away money and has at last found them a place in order to escape their abusive living situation. And yeah, if you watch my Uzumaki video, this is indeed one of the identical, almost prefab apartment blocks that you will find all over Japan, and these are fairly analogous to the Japanese row houses of yesteryear. I swear, this was my exact apartment for a good few years in Japan. It's eerie. I'm not kidding, the exact bloody same. And I think they're even staying in the exact room I used to. Anyway, Kato and his brother are actually really sweet. They're just way too wholesome. But we won't go into them too deeply. Feel free to go and read this manga yourself if you are interested. Suffice to say, Kato is doing everything he can to ensure that his little brother gets to go to a better school and have a better life than he had. We see both him and Kei lying in bed that night. In their own beds respectively, don't get any ideas. Kei's alone, fantasizing about Kishimoto, and Kato is spending time with his brother. One wishes the next hunt would begin already, and the other hopes that it never happens. Sure enough though, the teleportation starts, and this sends us into Hunt 3. Next time, we will finally get to cover Hunt 3, which, yeah, I'm sure that people who've read Gantz before are looking forward to, as this marks both the climax of the anime adaptation and the moment where Gantz kind of goes mask off, and also goes from a good, if scuffed manga, to something truly special. Still scuffed, but special. But that will wait until next time. Anyways, before we finish, I just want to say a huge thanks, as always, to my amazing patrons, without whom there is no way Mrs. Owl and I could keep on doing this. Cheddar, Crazy, Question Man 6, Hunting for R2D2, Inukia Koji, Kel Core, Opinion Custard, Philip Campbell, Piece of Yeast, Ranger Danger, Rose Montgomery, Wargle, Bee Empress, Camoleon, Cheshire Quill, Endymion, Aaron Arnold, Fluffy Burb, Jake Ramsey, Lance Goebel, Rafferty, Simone, and Squid. I also want to say an extra special thanks to our two Owlbard patrons, Jathis and Polite Crow. That is so generous. I am genuinely floored. If you also want to help support this channel and get your name in the credits, plus all sorts of cool patron extras like early videos, unique videos, Discord perks, a thing coming in Halloween, that should put a smile on your dials. Why not head on over to our Patreon? Otherwise, if you do want something a bit different, why not go and request an art commission from the amazingly talented Mrs. Owl? She did the avatars that I use on this channel, and a ton of other assets, and I can promise you, you will not find this quality at this price elsewhere. All details, as always, are in the description. Otherwise, take care, my friends, and I will see you next time. This is the Owl, signing off.